Was a kind, loving person. She cared nothing about the drama and all that. She cared about her family, her friends, her daughters. She was very strong, the life of a party, and she just liked to have fun. So we just never expected to be here doing all this for her because she didn't deserve any of this. But my sister was a very genuine person who just wanted to live and take care of her daughters.
On behalf of the family of Alexis Garth, an account has been made at the Redstone Federal Credit Union called Angels of Alexis for anybody who would like to make a donation for her children. In Limestone County, Alexa Harley.
On January 1st in Athens, Alabama, something tragic happened. A 26-year-old mother, Alexis Garth, was found lying in her driveway, lifeless, shot to death in the very place she had hoped to make a fresh start. Alexis was a mother of 2 young daughters, and on that fateful day, she was just beginning to turn her life around. But what led to this? What happened in the hours before her death? Was this the result of a violent outburst, or was there something deeper hiding behind it all? Stay with us as we piece together the events that led to Alexis's untimely end, and try to understand the choices that set this tragedy in motion. But here's the question: could this tragedy have been avoided? Were there signs Alexis and her family missed? Or was there no way to stop the inevitable? Let's find out together. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to express our deepest condolences to the family, friends, and loved ones of Alexis Garth. To her mother, Shunetta, her daughters, and all those who knew her, our hearts go out to you. No words can ease the pain of such a heartbreaking loss. Alexis was more than just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Her life was tragically cut short, but her memory will live on in the hearts of those who loved her. As we walk through the events that led to this tragic day, we do so with the utmost respect for Alexis and her family. We honor her life and the people who meant the most to her. Now let's dive into the story with the hope that justice will be served and that Alexis's legacy will remind us all of the importance of love, safety, and the protection of those we hold dear. Alexis Garth was 26 years old, a mother of 2 young daughters, one just 3 years old, the other barely 8 months old. She had big dreams for her future, dreams of a new beginning, a fresh start in a new home. Alexis wanted to build a better life for her girls, away from the struggles of the past. She worked hard, and she was determined to make things right. She had a vision of a peaceful life, a life full of hope and happiness. But those dreams were shattered in an instant. Kieran Yarborough, the man Alexis once loved, had a past that was anything but peaceful. He had a violent history, a history that Alexis had tried to move away from. Yarborough had been in and out of trouble with the law. He was no stranger to prison, and his release was supposed to be a new chapter for him too. But for Alexis, the man she had once trusted, the man she thought she could help, became her greatest threat. Alexis's hope for a brighter future would soon be crushed by the same person she had hoped to leave behind, and on January 1st, 2023, that tragic end came all too suddenly, right in the very place she had hoped to create a better life for her daughters. This was the story of someone who wanted nothing more than to give her children the life she never had, and all of that was taken away in one moment, a moment that would leave her family and all who knew her devastated. In the days leading up to Alexis's death, something was changing. Alexis had made a decision, one that was not easy, but necessary. She had decided to end her relationship with Kieran Yarborough. For some, ending a relationship might be difficult, but for Alexis, it was a matter of safety. This wasn't a simple breakup. This was a man she had known for years, a man who had once promised her the world, but that promise was shattered long ago. Yarborough had been released from prison only weeks before, and in the time since his return, Alexis had seen a side of him that terrified her. The man she had once loved was showing signs of aggression, and his violent tendencies were becoming harder to ignore. Alexis had always known that Yarborough had a history of violence that followed him wherever he went, but now it felt as though that history was catching up with them. Her family had seen the change in him too. They could feel the tension building. Alexis tried to hide her fear, but those close to her could tell. The phone calls, the late-night arguments, the threats. She was scared, and with good reason. Yarborough wasn't the man she once knew. He was unpredictable, angry, and controlling. Alexis' decision to leave him had only made things worse. The pressure had been building for weeks, and now Alexis was facing the consequences of that choice. She feared for her life, and those around her saw the weight of that fear in her eyes. But the danger wasn't just in the words he said, it was in his actions. He was persistent, showing up at her door, refusing to let her go, and with every interaction the threat became more real. The decision Alexis had made to protect herself and her children was the hardest one she could have made. She knew that walking away from him could be the end of her safety, but she didn't have a choice. No one should ever have to live in fear. And so she took that step, the only step she thought would protect her from the man who had become a stranger to her. But little did she know, that decision would set everything in motion. It was the early hours of New Year's Day. The streets were quiet, the world still wrapped in the peace of the night. But inside Alexis's home, a nightmare was about to unfold. The tension had been building for days, and now there was no escaping the storm. Alexis, terrified but determined, stood between Kiruan and her 3-year-old daughter. She was doing everything she could to protect her child, holding her close as the fear in her heart grew with every passing second. The small, quiet moments in the driveway, those brief glimpses of peace, were shattered in an instant. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the night shop, sudden and deafening. The calm that had filled the air moments before was now replaced by the terrifying noise of violence. Alexis didn't have time to react. Her body was struck over and over as she tried to shield her daughter from the danger that was closing in. She didn't stand a chance against the fury that Kiruan had unleashed. Alexis was shot 5 times. 5 times in the very place she had hoped to build a life of safety for her children. As she collapsed in the driveway, blood began to pool around her, staining the concrete. The quiet neighborhood that had once been filled with peace now felt suffocating, as though the entire world had stopped in that moment. But through it all, Alexis' main concern was her daughter. She had no way of knowing that those final moments would be her last. She didn't know that her own life would be taken so violently, but she did know this. She had to protect her child, no matter the cost. And in those final moments, her bravery was unmistakable. She shielded her daughter, who, terrified, had hidden under a nearby car. Alexis gave everything to make sure her child was safe, even though she could feel the life draining from her body. In the midst of the chaos, Alexis's daughter remained hidden, unaware of the full extent of the horror unfolding around her. The sounds of the gunfire still echoed in her young ears. The world she once knew now turned upside down in an instant. Alexis fought with everything she had left, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And as her last breath left her body, her final thoughts were likely for the safety of her children, the ones she had worked so hard to protect. Her life was taken, not by chance, but by the man she once trusted, Kiruan Yarborough. By the time Shunetta Garth, Alexis' mother, arrived at the scene, the unimaginable had already happened. Alexis, her daughter, was lying lifeless in the driveway of the home she had hoped would offer a new beginning. Blood had already started to pool around her, staining the concrete beneath her body. The reality of the situation hit Shunetta like a wave. Her daughter, the woman she had loved and raised, was gone. Her 3-year-old granddaughter was hiding under a nearby car, smart enough to escape the violence, but unable to fully understand the horror she had just witnessed. The child, frightened and confused, could only cling to the one piece of safety she could find. In those terrifying moments, Shunetta knew that her world had been torn apart in the most tragic way possible. Shunetta stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what she was seeing. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the details, but the scene before her was too overwhelming. She looked for some sign that it wasn't real, something to make sense of what had just occurred, but there was nothing. Nothing that could bring Alexis back. The police were already on the scene, quickly assessing the situation. Officers were moving in and out of the area, marking evidence and securing the perimeter. Their job was to investigate, to find answers, to piece together the truth. But for Shunetta and the rest of Alexis's family, the questions were already beginning to flood their minds. How had this happened? Why had Alexis been taken from them? The police began their work, documenting the crime scene, collecting evidence, and questioning anyone who might have seen something. They knew they had to find the person responsible, but for now everything seemed like a blur of flashing lights, hushed voices, and the overwhelming grief of a family torn apart. Family members recalled the moments before Alexis's death. They remembered Alexis's phone call, her frantic voice as she pleaded for help. She had called her sister, crying, saying that Yarborough had a gun and was threatening her, but by the time help could arrive, it was too late. Alexis had already been shot 5 times, and nothing could stop what had happened. Witnesses who were nearby told the police that they had heard gunshots in the early hours of the morning, followed by the sound of someone shouting. The horror had unfolded so quickly, with no time for anyone to intervene. The shock was overwhelming. It was a clear case of domestic violence gone horribly wrong, but the investigation was only beginning. As Shunetta watched the officers work, she knew one thing for sure. Alexis's life had been stolen, and she couldn't rest until she had justice for her daughter. She knew that they had to make sure her story, Alexis's story, didn't end with her death. They had to make the world see that Alexis was more than just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend, and her life mattered. Kieran Yarborough was arrested immediately after the shooting, found at the scene as police responded to the tragic event. But while the arrest was swift, the questions surrounding his actions, the reasons behind the violence and how it could have been prevented, started to linger in the minds of those left behind. The legal system now had to take center stage, but for Alexis's family, every moment spent waiting for answers felt like an eternity. Yarborough was charged with capital murder, a charge that could result in the most severe consequences. This wasn't just any murder. This was a crime committed in front of a helpless child, one who would carry the scars of that moment for the rest of her life. The presence of Alexis's 3-year-old daughter during the act added layers to the charge, making it one of the most devastating types of homicide. The fact that this young child had witnessed the death of her mother turned what could have been a simple case into something far more profound, with emotional and legal repercussions that extended far beyond the immediate crime. But what made this case even more complicated was Yarborough's history. He wasn't a man who had simply been caught in a moment of anger or a single rash decision. He had a long, violent history that Alexis, in an effort to protect herself and her children, had tried to escape. Several years earlier, Yarborough had been convicted of a violent crime, a conviction that led him to spend time behind bars. That past was supposed to follow him. The law was supposed to keep him away from society, especially considering his clear pattern of violence. But in a move that would shake the foundations of Alexis's family, Yarborough was granted an early release from prison in December 2022, just weeks before Alexis' death. His original sentence was set to last until May 2023, but for reasons that are still debated, the system had allowed him to return to the outside world prematurely. This decision, one that many found deeply troubling, was a direct contradiction to the promise the justice system had made to Alexis' family, a promise to keep violent offenders off the streets. The release of Yarborough raised immediate questions for Alexis's loved ones. How could someone with such a violent past be granted an early release? How could the system overlook the very real threat he posed? For Alexis's family, it felt like a double betrayal. First, by the man they once thought they could trust, and second, by a system that allowed someone with his history to walk free, only to end the life of someone who had worked so hard to build a better future for her children. For them, the pain of loss was compounded by this overwhelming sense of injustice. As the investigation into Alexis's death unfolded, her family knew that they couldn't simply let it slip by unnoticed. Alexis was not just another statistic. She wasn't just another woman whose life was taken and whose story would be forgotten. To them, she was their daughter, their sister, their mother. The family knew that the fight for justice had to be relentless. They couldn't afford to let her story fade into the background. Shunetta Garth, Alexis's mother, found herself grappling with more than just the grief of losing her daughter. She was also faced with the bitter reality that her daughter's life had been taken by someone who had already been given a second chance. How could the justice system, with all of its rules and procedures, let someone like Yarborough out so soon? How could they place so little value on the safety of others in a situation like this? The pain of losing Alexis was made all the worse by the feeling that it didn't have to happen, that perhaps if the system had done its job, Alexis would still be alive. Every single day that passed felt like another day spent in a state of limbo for Alexis's family. They waited for court dates, for justice, for answers. But time seemed to stand still. The emotional weight of this fight was as overwhelming as the grief they felt, but they knew they couldn't stop. They had to keep pushing, keep fighting for the justice their daughter and sister deserved. The community rallied around Alexis's family. The outpouring of support helped carry them through those dark days, but there was still a sense of dread that hovered over everything. Could the justice system be trusted to do the right thing? Or would this be another case where the system failed, and the memory of Alexis would fade into the background? The family wasn't about to let that happen. They fought for Alexis' name to be remembered, for her story to be told, and for justice to be served. As the case moved forward, the family waited with bated breath, hoping for a verdict that would bring them the closure they so desperately needed. But with every delay, every postponement, the uncertainty grew. Alexis was more than a victim. She was a person, a mother, a woman with dreams and aspirations. The family couldn't rest until those who were responsible were held accountable. For Shunetta, for Alexis' children, and for everyone who loved her, this fight for justice was personal. In the end, what was left was the painful truth that no amount of legal action could ever bring Alexis back. But they hoped with every ounce of their being that the justice system would honor her life by holding Kyrone Yarborough accountable for what he had done. The family's grief would never go away, but they needed the legal system to work, to ensure that Alexis's life had not been in vain, and that no one else would have to suffer the way they had. Alexis Garth's death has left a hole in the hearts of her family, her friends, and everyone who knew her. The grief is unimaginable. The pain of losing someone so full of life, so full of hope, is something no one should ever have to experience. But while we mourn her loss, this case raises some difficult and uncomfortable questions about the systems that are meant to protect us. One of the biggest questions that stands out is, should individuals with violent histories like Kyrone Yarborough be granted early release from prison? It's a decision that has far-reaching consequences. In this case, Alexis paid the ultimate price for that decision. She was killed by someone who, despite his past, was given another chance. One that ultimately led to her tragic end. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Could there have been a way to stop Yarborough from being released early? If the justice system had been more cautious, could Alexis still be alive today? These questions are hard to answer, but they are questions we must ask. We must consider how many more lives could be saved if we took a harder look at the risks of releasing inmates with violent histories too soon. How many families have to go through this kind of pain before we truly understand the cost of these decisions? And then there is the issue of domestic violence. Alexis's story is not just about one woman's death, it's about a much larger issue. It's about the danger that women face when they try to leave an abusive relationship. Alexis made the decision to leave Kyrone Yarborough, but that decision came with a heavy price. It's a reality that many victims of abuse face. Leaving can sometimes be more dangerous than staying. We need to talk about this. We need to recognize the signs of domestic violence earlier, and we need to provide better support for those trying to break free from abusive relationships. It's easy to say that things could have been different, that we could have done something to prevent this. But the truth is, the system failed Alexis. And it's not just Alexis who has been affected by this, it's her children, her mother, her siblings, her friends. They will carry this loss with them for the rest of their lives. So, we ask you, what do you think? How can we change the system to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Should the justice system be more strict about early releases for inmates with violent pasts? Should more be done to protect victims of domestic violence who are trying to escape their abusers? Your thoughts matter, and it's important that we keep having these conversations. Alexis's story should serve as a reminder that we must do better, that we must protect those who are most vulnerable, and that we can never take the safety of others for granted. It's time for us to reflect on the changes that need to be made so that no other family has to go through what Alexis's family is facing today. As we finish this story, let's honor Alexis's memory, not just through sorrow, but through action. Let's make sure that we never forget the lessons that her life and her tragic death have taught us. If Alexis's story has left an impact on you, if you felt the weight of the tragedy and the injustice, we ask you to take a moment to show your support. Please, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, where we dive into the truth behind the headlines. But beyond that, we want to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the early release of inmates with violent pasts? Should the justice system be more careful in these decisions? Could anything have been done to prevent Alexis's death? These are tough questions, but they're questions we need to ask. Your voice matters. Share your thoughts, share your opinions, and help us continue the conversation. Let's keep Alexis's story alive, and let's make sure that we learn from it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.